Welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be in Chapter 12, which takes a look at contemporary leadership models. There are many models to choose from, and many of them really say the same thing, which is be open and be receptive and responsive to those under you. But today we're going to take a look at Hersey Blanchard, which is one of my favorite models, and that's situational leadership. So we've got several to look at. So today we're going to deal with contemporary models. So let's go ahead and begin. Okay, everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to be in Chapter 12, which looks at the contemporary views of leadership in organizations. Now, in the past, and I believe last week, we looked at several theories that examined the traditional roles of leadership. We saw LPC theory and path goal theory and the decision tree model, and some of the ways that management and leadership have evolved over the years. We've seen from the leader-oriented type models to where now we're getting towards the follower-oriented type models, which means that we're going from the emphasis on the leader to the emphasis being placed on the follower when it comes to leadership models. Now, what we're going to look at this week, you see here is just a quick outline. We see the leader-member exchange model, the Hersey Blanchard model, attributions of leadership, and then updated versions of the original models that we've looked at before. So let's go ahead and look at some of these contemporary models. Now, the first one that we're going to consider is the leader-member exchange model, and this suggests that leaders form unique independent relationships with each of their subordinates. And as you see here, and as you've read in the textbook, each superior subordinate pair is termed as a vertical dyad. So you have these little shapes or triangles, or sometimes it's just the leader and the one person, which formulates relationships within the members and within the leader. Supervisors establish a close working relationship with a small number of trusted subordinates, referred to as the in-group, and then subordinates who are not part of the in-group are called, of course, the out-group, and they receive less of the supervisor's time and attention. Now, I have seen this, and you might have seen this, and you might have experienced this with some of your leaders in your experiences working or even in ministry. The relationship, because of the nature of the relationship, you're going to have different outcomes or consequences. Motivation is going to be different. Sometimes quality of output and quantity of output can be affected by this. And normally what this means is that the closer the leader is with the subordinate, the more that subordinate is going to feel a part of that company or a part of that endeavor that the leader is trying to initiate. They're going to be usually more productive and more, the morale is going to be higher and so forth than those who are in the out group. I remember watching sometimes people, in my experience, I've seen some leaders who have spent time with the in-group, and it really took a toll on those who were not considered the in-group, the out-group. The out-group figured, well, hey, we're not important, so why bother or why worry? We'll just be here and we'll do the job, and that's pretty much it. And that's a hard place to be for the follower, and it can be a devastating place to be for the leader, especially when the leader has to have the collaboration and the buy-in of all of his or her members and so forth. But really what this means is that the closer the relationship between the leader and the follower, the different type of outputs that you're going to have as a result of that. Now think about this. Who in the Bible, where in the Bible do we see the leader-member exchange model being represented? Well, if you remember, Jesus and his disciples. Now, Jesus had 12 disciples, but who were the ones who were considered to be the in group? Well, you remember Peter, James, and John. Now, Peter, James, and John had from all accounts, from what we read in the Gospels, a closer, more intimate relationship with Jesus than the other 9 disciples. Now, it's not that he didn't include all the disciples and that he didn't love all the disciples or spend time with them or train them and mentor them and all of these things and call them. But who were the ones who shared his most intimate thoughts and his most really profound moments on the Mount of Transfiguration? Jesus didn't haul all of them up there. It was Peter, James, and John. Who were the ones who went into the more innermost part of the Garden of Gethsemane? He left the disciples, the majority of the disciples there. Judas was on his way to betray him. But he went a little farther, the Bible records, with Peter, James, and John. And he said, wait here. And then Jesus made the rest of the journey by himself. But I can only imagine the closeness and the quality of relationship and training and development and so forth. I hate to put it in those terms, but think about how blessed Peter, James, and John were when they were able to spend more time with them and really share in the things that Jesus didn't maybe share with the other disciples. And we only know what the Bible records. I can only imagine what else they did. But that would be an example of the leader-member exchange. Now, the Bible doesn't say, never records where the other disciples approached Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, you know, we belong to you too. Why can't we share in these moments and so forth? So we don't see the animosity, we don't see jealousies and so forth, but we do know that there was a particular relationship that Jesus had with these 3 as opposed to the others who he called. Even though they all were together and they all loved Jesus and Jesus loved them and they all were called disciples, not everybody shared that intimacy that Jesus shared with Peter, James, and John. Now, as you see here, figure 12.1 gives us a visual depiction of the LMX model. And you see these dyads, you see the little groups, whether it's in triangle form or whether it's a little bit more concise. What you see here is a representation of how this pans out. You have the out group, which is subordinate 1, 2, and 3, and then you have subordinate 4 and 5, who is a part of the in group. And it really, you really don't need a visual to be able to see that there are those that have a closer relationship or an in-group status than those with an out-group status. Now, I have, as I've said, I've experienced this, and normally what I've noticed is the ones who are in the in-group have been ostracized by those in the out-group, and those in the out-group are normally larger than those in the in-group. You have a select few who are considered to be closest, and this is what I've experienced. But by and large, the greater number who are the out-group folks, they have a tendency to shy away from or kind of separate themselves from the in-group, and the in-group is really not worried about it a lot of times because they have the ear of the leaders. So there's a lot of politics that go on. Culture can play a part in this. Chemistry, and there's just sometimes, and I've experienced it myself, where you just don't have the chemistry with that person, with that leader. It's not that you're a bad subordinate or that the person is a bad leader. It's just that you just don't have that that type of rapport or that type of chemistry that is necessary to have a close relationship. Another example too would be the nature of the work. There are some jobs that require only a few are going to be able to have access to the leader, which may form closer relationships than the whole, who may be distant from the leader. And this happens in ministry as well. You know, there's the pastor who has people that he likes, not that he dislikes, or use a better phrasing. There are some that the pastor has just a natural rapport with, and there are other ministers and staff members who he may not have that chemistry with. So all of these things come into play when you're taking a look at the leader-member exchange. But really, it all just boils down to the level of intimacy, and the level of intimacy with the leader can have consequences that will carry over into the workplace and as a result affect performance. Now, the Hersey-Blanchard model is one that I have used for quite a while. And the Hersey-Blanchard model, and what we call situational leadership, takes the emphasis away from the focus being on the leader to where the focus is being put on the follower. And as you see here, it suggests that appropriate leader behavior depends on the readiness of followers. In the past, you had to get along with the leader and just do whatever the leader wanted. You had to adjust your work style and everything to the leader. Today, the leader has to adjust his or her leadership style to the readiness, and this is a key word here when it comes to situational leadership. Now, what does readiness consist of? Well, it's the degree of motivation, competence, experience, and interest in accepting responsibility. And it improves. The leader's relationship style should change from telling, which is delegating. Here, you take the person, they're brand new, they don't know anything, so it's more like just do what I do or do what I tell you to do. You don't know enough right now to have any input, so just be quiet, take notes, follow me, whatever. That's telling. It's more of an autocratic method of leadership. Once the person gets a little bit of experience and their confidence starts to grow a little bit, then you go from telling to selling, where you more or less become, you're still training them, but you become more of a motivator. You sell them on it. Their confidence isn't exactly up to the level of a professional or a person who is completely qualified, but you're working with them. And then as they get a little bit more experience and a little bit more motivated, confident, then you go into a participating style of leadership. And participating is where you are more or less an equiper. You're a Barnabas maybe. They know pretty much what to do. You're just now encouraging them. You're more of a coach now than anything else. For instance, when I was in seminary, I had all of the book learning and classroom training that I could have. So there was a technical knowledge, but I had not really proven myself in the field as a pastor. So I didn't need any more lectures. I just needed someone to come along and encourage me and to equip me with things that I needed as I moved up into that position. And then once you are there, when you are fully motivated and you are fully trained, then you can delegate, and that's where you want to be. Delegating means that it's yours now. I can move on to other things, or to take another person and develop them and model my model to them. This frees you up to be able to let that job go, knowing that it's in the capable hands of someone who is fully motivated and someone who is fully trained in that position. And you won't believe the amount of blessings that will give you in return when you do that. You can't be everywhere. And there are those, and I've seen them in military and I've seen them in the private sector, who micromanage everybody. They think they have to be everywhere and over everybody's shoulder. That's poor leadership. These are individuals who either have not trained their people well and motivated them well, or they're not certain about their leadership ability, so they feel like they have to crack the whip over people, and they're not very trusting. So what they'll do, they'll spend their whole day doing everybody else's job or making sure everybody else is doing their job. Well, eventually it's going to catch up to them, because the more they're into everybody else's business, the less they're able to tend to their own. And these people usually burn themselves out after a while. So the leadership model will take a person who is brand new, and they will adjust their leadership style to that person's readiness level. And always remember, readiness consists of motivation and ability. And once you have those fully attained, then you can turn the job over to them, and you'll find freedom that you have never experienced before. And that's where you want the people. Now, Figure 12.2 shows you an example of this in a graph. Notice when you're first in the job and you take a person brand new, your relationship with them is going to be low. There's not going to be a lot of interpersonal ability. What you're seeing here is a high task behavior. Let's just focus on the job. We're not going to talk about your motivation or anything like that. Right now, we are just training you to be able to be adept at doing the job. But now, once that person's readiness level increases, the amount of relationship increases to where you reach the apex. Now, where you reach the apex of relationships, as the person becomes more knowledgeable, the less you're going to be dealing with the task. As you see, as the person grows in ability and motivation, you're not going to be focusing so much on the task as you are the relationship and building them up and their motivation. And then here at the end, you have a low amount of relationship and you have a low amount of task orientation or task behavior. Why is this? Why is it that my relationship with this person would be low again? Well, because you're not having to work with them all the time now. You're not having to have that every day, 8 hours a day interaction. You can leave them to the job and move on to other people or other responsibilities. So this is how the Hersey-Blanchard model pans out. And it, as we've said, is quite effective. This is probably one of the most important models, at least in my estimation, that you can have, because it once again takes the emphasis off of the person, the leader, and places the emphasis on the employee. And think about it, when you have an employee who is motivated and they are adept at the job, that's most of the battle. Many leaders today will tell you they will spend the majority of their time trying to correct or oversee their workers, and it shouldn't be that way. Now, here's another key to it, and I'm not sure if it's the reason why more employers and leaders aren't using this, but this requires that you spend time with the employees. And why do I say that? Well, as a leader, you have to assess where that person is as far as motivation and as far as ability is concerned. Think about how disastrous it would be when you took a brand new employee and just delegated everything to them from day one. Okay, here's the keys, here's the job, go ahead and do it. Well, chances are the person wouldn't be able to, even if they are knowledgeable in the job as far as the technical requirements or whatever. That employee may not understand how your company or your culture accomplishes those functions and so forth. But by the same token, why would you want to take a person who is fully motivated and fully trained and micromanage them? In fact, when you do that to a person who is at that readiness level, then you're going to demotivate them. In fact, you're going to insult them. And a lot of times they'll leave the company because they feel like they are not given the trust or the respect or whatever. So you have to be careful with that. And the only way you can know where a person lies is, again, by getting out there and getting to know them, assessing them correctly, and applying the appropriate leadership technique to their readiness level. Well, that's all we're going to have for today, and tomorrow we'll continue on with some of the other models of leadership. Well, today we saw some of the contemporary models, which is the leader-member exchange, and we saw the Hersey-Blanchard model. And the Hersey-Blanchard model is one that just really is near and dear to my heart because it's what I've used from my military days even today. And that's taking a person based on their abilities and applying the appropriate leadership method to them instead of having them conform to you. And as we go into this chapter a little bit more, we're going to see some other models, but that's enough for today, and I'll see you tomorrow.